Lebanon's health minister says 25 people were killed in Israeli strikes on the country since early Friday. Israel's military has been pounding more targets in southern Lebanon as it presses on with its air campaign against Hezbollah militia there. Strikes have been hitting the southern city of Tyre and other places after the US and its allies failed to secure a temporary ceasefire along the Israeli-Lebanese border. More than 700 people have been killed in Israeli strikes this week. The Israeli military says it intercepted 4 drones launched from Lebanon on Friday and that 10 others had been fired into Israel, 10 other projectiles, that is. Some were intercepted and others fell onto empty fields. One person was injured. Hezbollah says it targeted the city of Tiberias. And Israel has also deployed tanks and armoured vehicles along the border. Israel commanders have been telling troops that airstrikes against Hezbollah targets would potentially pave the way for a ground assault. Retired Israeli Brigadier General and reservist Asaf Orion was in command and intelligence positions in the military for over 30 years, taking part in diplomatic talks as well on the Palestinian territories and Lebanon. He's an international fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Welcome. What is next, diplomacy or a ground invasion?
I believe what we are seeing is a combination of diplomacy and military means. When the military means are seeking to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities on the physical dimension, while providing a pressure and support for diplomacy in order to enforce or advance Israel's demands, which are not yet declared but are quite clear. We need a calm border over time. We need Hezbollah away from this border. We need its ballistic threat to Israel greatly diminished. And we need to make sure it doesn't rearm and resupplied by Iran, resurging this threat once more and again threatening Israel. We need to remember that for the last year almost, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel unprovoked in an initiated way in solidarity of Gaza. So at last, Israel has moved from the defensive to the offensive, which might also include ground maneuvers.
Will airstrikes get to the tunnels that Hezbollah also uses, like Hamas does in Gaza? I mean, only boots on the ground sound like they can have an impact.
A lot of what Hezbollah has amassed during the last 18 years is destroyable from air. As we see, Hezbollah embedded its assets inside populated areas and civilian structures, and the IDF seems quite able to detect, locate, fix, and kill those targets, evacuating and warning the population beforehand to minimize collateral. So most of the casualties we hear about are probably Hezbollah combatants. On some of those issues, there is no escape except either guaranteeing it diplomatically or going there by foot and on track to make sure that the destruction is more thorough.
But it sounds like the exact same pattern as Gaza. Warnings, airstrikes, a ground offensive, civilian deaths, a massive number, and diplomacy taking a back seat.
Diplomacy has been welcome to advance the security conditions for the last 18 years and apparently failed. What we are seeing now, the result of this is the failure of the implementation of 1701, United Nations Security Council resolution, and also Resolution 1559, talking about the disarmament of non-governmental weapons in Lebanon. So eventually, when this fails, and when we are facing the same school of war of a terror army striking Israeli population from afar and from near, direct and indirect fires, embedded inside populated and urban areas, which means the choice of the battlefield in Lebanon has actually been made by Hezbollah itself. And then when you talk about military approaches, if you need to take out enemy capabilities, you need to go after those, if possible, standoff by air power, massive precision strike, intelligence-driven attack on those assets wherever they are. And we often see in the basement of civilian building, you see fireworks and secondary explosions of multi-rocket launchers. And at the same time, some of those targets which cannot be reached from the air might be needed to be reached on the ground. But the alternative to that is always diplomacy if it provides the right guarantees for Israel's security and if the implementation this time will be successful.
Okay, well, I want to pick up on that last point. Our Beirut bureau chief told us earlier today that Hezbollah might even welcome Israeli boots on the ground, saying ground battles is what their fighters are good at. What do you say to that?
Definitely a ground maneuver, ground attack is more challenging. It's more trying. The friction is higher, the damage is higher. But I suggest we all cautiously weigh what we know about Hezbollah. The last days have I think, provided us ample examples of what Hezbollah thought it was ready for and found itself on the back foot, surprised and astonished, even shocked by things that Israel did to it. Hezbollah was supposed to be a very secretive organization. So apparently Israel's intelligence managed to crack into this and compromise Hezbollah's security. And you can see it in many aspects, including the attack targets and the hunting down of senior Hezbollah operatives, which are being killed one by one.
The other moving piece in all of this, of course, is that militants in neighbouring countries are attacking Israel too. Does Israel want a wider war to deal with its enemies once and for all?
Israel is in a war with its enemies. It's a war declared by Hamas, afterwards joined by Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, who yesterday launched another ballistic missile toward Tel Aviv that was intercepted. In the last week, we saw several drones and cruise missiles flying from Iraq. Iran itself is providing all this. The West Bank is crackling after a flood of weapons and finance flowing by Iran into the West Bank. Syria is another bed of Iraqi and other militias preparing to attack Israel from the northeast. So I think Israel is attacked from 7 fronts, and we need to recognize that. Israel chose to first deal with the Gaza front and now deal with the Lebanon front, and the rest of the fronts will need to follow. We already saw a direct conflict with Iran in mid-April, and I don't think that's the end of it. But both sides currently prefer not to go into direct fighting, and there's always a space for diplomacy if we use this space collectively. It can't be just focused on the urgent call for a ceasefire. It needs to address the core reasons and the root causes here, which are the ongoing support and orchestration of a campaign led by Iran and seeking Israel's destruction after a long attrition.
Well, let's see if diplomacy wins after all. Retired Israeli Brigadier General and reservist Asaf Orion, thank you very much for being on DW News today.
Thank you. Shalom. Stay safe.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was greeted with cheers and jeers as he began speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York. His speech comes a day after the Israeli government rejected a US-led ceasefire proposal with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Netanyahu says his army will continue fighting until there's 60,000 Israelis displaced by Hezbollah's rocket fire can return home. Regarding Gaza, he told the gathered leaders it is up to Hamas to end the war in the Palestinian territories.
Ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it.
Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber is at the UN for us and has been following Netanyahu's speech. You were in the room when he was speaking. How tense was it?
There was quite a stark contrast between the clapping and the cheering that we heard up at the press gallery, where a group of staff but also supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu clapped and were cheering on the Israeli Prime Minister. And what we saw down there where the delegations were sitting, we saw some of them leaving during his speech, also before his speech. And as you can see, the support that he had and the cheering that you might also heard on the cameras was mainly from the supporters that were up there, also standing up when the Israeli Prime Minister arrived, and booing when the two other speakers that spoke before him addressed the UN General Assembly and criticized Israel and the government of Benjamin Netanyahu.
What stood out to you content-wise in this long-awaited speech?
So what the Prime Minister said and what he did not say, I mean, that might be even more interesting. He did not refer to what the Israeli side called an American-French proposal for this 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And only 30 minutes after his speech, the IDF announced that it strike what it called Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. Prime Minister Netanyahu brought out two maps. He's known for bringing maps to the UN General Assembly, with one of them also showing the Israeli-occupied West Bank as part of Israel. He said that they will continue fighting. He lashed out on several other countries without naming them. He started his speech by saying that he had not intended to come to the UN General Assembly, but he said he wanted to set the record straight. He lashed out on the UN, also on the ICC, and that's also interesting and important. There has been a topic over the last couple of days over this impending arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and also the Defense Minister Gallant.
And lastly, tell us about the demonstrations outside.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said that there were families of the hostages up there in the press gallery. Two people stood up, but there was a bigger protest in front of his hotel before he addressed the UN General Assembly. Here, there's been pro-Palestinian protests yesterday evening and yesterday night here, protesting against Netanyahu, also something that happened earlier today. And he said that he even referred to the protesters outside. So New York has seen these types of pro-Palestinian protests in several campuses, and that's something that the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, also addressed and acknowledged during his speech yesterday here at the General Assembly. So we're still waiting. Benjamin Netanyahu is still in the building. There's, of course, a lot of security, a lot of tight security, helicopters flying above us as we're ending the fourth day of the high-level week here at the UN General Assembly.
A lot to digest. DW's Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber at the UN in New York. Thank you.